at the center of the marble lobby beneath a chandelier engraved with the company's founding date. Victoria Langston lifted one gloved hand and gave a quiet order. "Remove her." Security obeyed. Danielle Fisher, 4 months pregnant, unsteady but composed, was gripped by the arm and dragged across polished stone, while donors, executives, and cameras watched. Victoria did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She called Danielle an embarrassment, an opportunist, a mistake. Michael stood frozen, believing his mother was protecting the family name. No one in that room understood the truth. The woman they forced outside was the only person with the legal authority to end every career inside that building. If you believe dignity matters more than reputation, stay with this story until the end. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I read every comment. And if you stand for quiet strength and real justice, consider subscribing. Danielle Fisher had always understood the value of silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the silence of surrender, but the kind that allowed a person to see everything while appearing to see nothing at all. That morning, hours before the gala, she sat alone at the small breakfast table in the penthouse overlooking Manhattan. Winter light pressed softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city moved with indifferent urgency, taxis sliding through intersections, men in dark coats speaking into phones, women striding toward offices that would never know their names. Danielle rested one hand against the curve of her abdomen. 4 months. The doctor had called it a stable pregnancy, but stable was a fragile word. Stress was to be avoided. Sudden shocks were to be minimized. She had written that down. Across from her lay a slim leather notebook, edges worn from use. Inside were not emotional confessions or diary entries. There were timestamps, observations, exact phrases. March 3rd, Victoria. She doesn't understand legacy. March 18th, removed from investor prep call. No notice. April 2nd, finance CC'd me after revision, not before. Danielle did not underline the insults. She recorded patterns. Fisher and Langston Holdings had been founded on 2 surnames, but only one of them carried generational wealth. The Langstons were old New York philanthropic Gallas Museum Wing's private school endowments. The Fishers were quieter, strategic, capital architects who preferred boardrooms to ballrooms. Danielle was the last direct heir of Fisher Capital. Michael Langston believed he was building an empire. In truth, he was operating within one. He emerged from the bedroom, adjusting his cufflinks navy tuxedo pressed to precision. Michael was handsome in the effortless way of men who had always been affirmed. His confidence was not arrogance, it was inheritance. "You're coming tonight, right?" he asked, though his tone suggested assumption rather than invitation. Danielle looked up from her notebook. "I was planning to." He smiled, distracted checking messages on his phone. "It'll be packed. Pressed, too. Mom's been obsessing over every detail." Danielle closed the notebook gently. "I'm sure she has." Michael did not notice the neutrality in her voice. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead, a gesture tender but rushed. "You'll be fine," he added, as if reassurance were needed for an event she had helped fund. He left before she could answer. The penthouse grew quiet again. Danielle stood slowly and walked to the window. From this height, the Langston name seemed large, permanent. But permanence, she knew, was a matter of structure. Years earlier, before her marriage, Danielle's father had finalized a trust, Fisher Capital Trust. The majority voting shares of Fisher and Langston Holdings were transferred there under a governance structure few people had bothered to read carefully. Trustee authority had been assigned to Danielle upon his passing. Operational leadership chief executive officer was tied not to the public-facing role, but to controlling voting power within the holding entity. Public announcements had named a transitional CEO after the merger. Later, that role had been ceremonially shifted. Titles had been adjusted, but voting power had not moved. Danielle had never corrected the assumptions. Across town, in a corner office overlooking the Hudson, Victoria Langston reviewed the seating chart for the gala. Her silver hair was sculpted into elegance, her posture impeccable. "Danielle shouldn't speak tonight," she told her assistant without looking up. "It confuses the narrative." "The narrative?" the assistant asked carefully. Victoria's lips curved faintly. "Investors like clarity. Michael represents continuity. We cannot afford distractions. Distractions." That word, too, Danielle would have written down. At headquarters, preparations intensified. Floral arrangements arrived. A string quartet tuned instruments beneath the grand chandelier engraved with the founding year. Fisher and Langston Holdings presented itself as stability embodied glass steel and philanthropic virtue. In the legal department, Rebecca Lawson reread an internal approval memo for the third time. Rebecca was not easily unsettled. As general counsel, she had navigated regulatory audits, shareholder disputes, and hostile takeover attempts. But this memo, approved under Victoria's directive, carried irregularities. A charitable disbursement routed through Harrington Event Group. No competitive bidding documentation, expedited authorization. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. She opened a new email. To Danielle Fisher. Subject: quick compliance question. Danielle read the message an hour later. Rebecca's tone was measured professional. A request for clarification regarding authorization thresholds and board visibility. Nothing accusatory, nothing dramatic. Danielle read it twice. Then she opened her laptop, Marital, and accessed archived governance documents. She reviewed approval matrices, signature requirements, escalation procedures. The irregularity was subtle but present. Victoria had bypassed standard review. Danielle did not respond immediately. Instead, she saved the email to a secure folder. Timestamp noted. At noon, she attended a prenatal appointment alone. The ultrasound room was dim quiet. The technician turned the screen slightly. "There's your baby." A flicker. A heartbeat. Danielle watched without speaking. She memorized the rhythm. Outside, Michael texted her, "Big night. Proud of us." Danielle typed back, "Be careful with the phrasing." He responded with a laughing emoji, not understanding. By late afternoon, stylists arrived at the penthouse to assist her. Victoria had arranged it, insisting appearances mattered. Danielle allowed the makeup artist to work, though she preferred minimalism. The stylist selected a pale blue gown, elegant, understated. "You'll look stunning," the woman said warmly. Danielle met her own gaze in the mirror. Stunning was irrelevant. Composed was essential. When the car arrived to take her downtown, she carried only a small clutch and her notebook. At headquarters, Michael rehearsed his speech in a private conference room. Words about growth, legacy, expansion into renewable investments. He believed them. He had worked hard. Late nights, strategic calls. He did not know that every major capital allocation required final authorization through a structure he had never examined. Victoria entered the room without knocking. "Remember," she told him, gently adjusting his tie, "confidence is leadership." He nodded. "And Danielle?" he asked. Victoria's expression cooled by half a degree. "She'll be there. Just don't let her derail the message." Michael frowned slightly. "Derail?" "She has a tendency to complicate things." In the car, Danielle reviewed Rebecca's email again. Then she wrote one line in her notebook: "If governance fails quietly, it fails completely." The city lights sharpened as evening descended. Inside the lobby, guests began to arrive. Laughter echoed against marble. Camera flashes ignited in quick bursts. Danielle stepped from the car, slowly steadying herself before entering the building whose largest shareholder interest she controlled. No one at the entrance questioned her. Why would they? Her name was etched into the founding plaque. But inside, power had been rearranged by perception. And perception, Danielle knew, was fragile. As she crossed the threshold, she noticed the security team positioned more prominently than usual. She noticed Tom Bradley near the central pillars speaking into his earpiece. She noticed Victoria across the room, greeting donors with a practiced smile. Danielle felt the baby shift faintly beneath her ribs. She placed her palm there briefly. Silence, she reminded herself, was not absence. It was preparation. Marriage in the Langston world was never only about love. It was alignment, optics, continuity. Danielle Fisher had understood that long before she accepted Michael's proposal. She had met him 3 years earlier at a renewable energy summit in Boston. He had been charismatic on stage, confident without appearing rehearsed, articulate without sounding arrogant. He spoke about sustainable growth as though he believed in it not merely as a market strategy. Danielle had been seated in the third row, unintroduced, observing. Afterward, Michael approached her with easy warmth. "I've read about Fisher Capital's early solar acquisitions," he had said. "Your father was ahead of everyone." She had studied him for a moment before answering. He preferred to be early rather than loud. Michael smiled. "I'd like to hear more about that." He had listened when she spoke. That more than anything had drawn her in. What Danielle had not fully seen then was the gravitational field around him, subtle but constant. Victoria Langston's influence was not theatrical. It was architectural. It shaped rooms long before she entered them. By the time Danielle and Michael married, Fisher and Langston Holdings had already completed its merger restructuring. Public statements framed it as a balanced union between two powerful families. Internally, it was more precise. Fisher Capital Trust retained controlling voting shares, 51% placed into a protected governance vehicle. The trustee held decision-making authority when votes required escalation. Danielle became trustee upon her father's death 6 months before the wedding. Victoria had attended the funeral dressed in immaculate black, her condolences polished and brief. "You must be exhausted," she had said softly to Danielle afterward. "These responsibilities can overwhelm a young woman." Danielle had simply nodded. Overwhelm was not the word she would have chosen. In the months that followed, the wedding's subtle shifts began. Calendar adjustments, strategy meetings rescheduled without her. Investor dinners framed as family-only representation. At first, Danielle attributed it to transition. Michael was stepping into greater visibility. Public markets responded well to legacy narratives. But patterns formed. In one early board prep session, Danielle entered the conference room to find printed packets already distributed. Her seat at the table had been filled by an assistant, setting down additional water glasses. "Oh," the assistant stammered. "Mrs. Langston." I didn't realize Danielle had smiled faintly. "It's fine." She took a chair along the wall instead. Michael noticed but misread it as humility. Victoria noticed and interpreted it as confirmation. Later that evening, Michael had approached Danielle in their apartment kitchen. "Mom thinks it's better if I take lead on external strategy," he explained gently. "She worries investors might feel confused with too many voices." Danielle rinsed a wine glass before responding. "Do you feel confused?" He hesitated, misinterpreting again. "No, of course not. It's just about optics." "Optics." Danielle dried the glass carefully. She did not argue. She wrote it down later. Optics used to reduce structural presence. The prenuptial agreement had been Victoria's insistence. Protection for both of you, she had claimed. The document was extensive. Asset partitions, governance clarifications, limitations regarding marital claims on corporate equity. Victoria had believed the agreement shielded the Langston name. She had not realized the trust structure predated it. Danielle signed without resistance. Michael had taken that as proof of trust. What he did not understand was that Danielle never intended to claim anything that was already hers. In the present, as the gala orchestra tuned their instruments downstairs, Danielle stood near a tall mirror in a quiet side corridor, observing the flow of guests. She saw how staff deferred first to Victoria before redirecting inquiries to Michael. She saw which board members approached her warmly and which avoided her gaze. She saw Tom Bradley reposition security subtly closer to the central staircase. Danielle adjusted the thin bracelet at her wrist. 4 months pregnant, a life forming quietly beneath her ribs. Inside the main hall, Victoria began her opening remarks ahead of schedule. "Tonight," she said smoothly into the microphone, "we celebrate continuity, the strength of legacy, the leadership that guides us forward." Applause followed. Michael stood slightly behind her, smiling, unaware of the omission. Danielle listened from the periphery. Continuity, leadership. She did not need public acknowledgement, but she did require procedural integrity. Earlier that afternoon, she had reviewed Rebecca Lawson's compliance concern in greater detail. The charitable allocation through Harrington Event Group had been authorized under emergency branding justification. No board vote recorded. Danielle had cross-checked authorization thresholds. The amount exceeded unilateral approval limits. She had made a note: if this was oversight, correct it. If this was pattern, preserve it. Across the room, Victoria's eyes located Danielle at last. The smile on her face did not change, but something tightened behind it. After finishing her remarks, Victoria descended the small stage and approached her daughter-in-law. "You look appropriate," she said quietly. "Thank you," Danielle replied. Victoria's gaze dropped momentarily to Danielle's midsection, calculating. "Try not to linger near the press line. We're controlling the narrative tonight." Danielle met her eyes evenly. "I wasn't planning to speak." Victoria studied her for a fraction of a second longer than politeness required. There was something about Danielle's stillness that unsettled her. Not defiance, not submission. Containment. Michael joined them moments later, breath warm with champagne. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing between them. Of course, Victoria answered before Danielle could. Danielle smiled faintly. "Yes." Michael squeezed her hand briefly, already distracted by another executive calling his name. As he walked away, Victoria leaned closer. "You must understand," she murmured, voice low. "This company existed before you. It will exist after you." Danielle did not respond immediately. In her mind, she reviewed the trust documents stored in a secure legal archive. She recalled the specific clause granting trustee override in matters of fiduciary breach. She recalled her father's handwriting in the margins. "Power is safest when quiet." Out loud, she said only structures matter. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Excuse me, nothing," Danielle said. A server passed between them with a tray of champagne flutes. Music swelled. Across the hall, Rebecca Lawson stood near the back, watching carefully. She had noticed the tension. She had also noticed Danielle's composure. Rebecca understood governance. She also understood that authority, unexamined, often calcified into entitlement. Danielle moved toward a side table and opened her clutch discreetly. Inside her notebook waited. She wrote 3 lines. Gala remarks, omission of governance acknowledgement, Victoria directive control narrative, security presence elevated. She closed it again. On stage, Michael began his speech. He spoke well. Investors nodded approvingly. Cameras flashed. Danielle watched him with something that was not resentment. It was recognition. He truly believed he was steering the ship. He did not see the foundation beneath it. As applause filled the hall, Danielle felt a faint tightening in her abdomen. Not pain, but warning. She inhaled slowly. Slow burn, she reminded herself. Truth did not require spectacle. It required documentation and patience. By the week of the gala, Fisher and Langston Holdings had become a theater of careful choreography. Assistants moved with rehearsed urgency. Floral installations were measured twice before approval. Press briefings were refined adjectives, softened or sharpened, depending on audience. Every detail passed directly or indirectly through Victoria Langston's supervision. Danielle noticed the pattern, not because it was loud, but because it was systematic. On Monday morning, an updated event agenda circulated to senior staff. Danielle's name had been removed from the executive welcome segment. No explanation. She received the document at the same time as everyone else. She did not reply to the sender. Instead, she opened the prior version archived in her email. She compared timestamps, tracked revision authorship, revised by Executive Office V. Langston. Danielle made a quiet note. 10:42 a.m. agenda revised. Speaking role removed. Michael texted her around noon. Mom thinks it's cleaner if I handle the welcome solo. Less crowded stage. Danielle read the message twice before responding. Understood. There was no accusation in her reply. No protest. Michael interpreted her brevity as agreement. That afternoon in the legal department on the 32nd floor, Rebecca Lawson sat with 2 printed spreadsheets spread across her desk. The numbers were not catastrophic. They were not criminal on their face, but they were inconsistent. The charitable arm of Fisher and Langston Holdings' Langston Foundation Initiative had disbursed a substantial sum to Harrington Event Group over the past quarter. The vendor description listed strategic brand consulting and philanthropic integration. Rebecca had searched public records. Harrington Event Group had no significant history of philanthropic consulting prior to this year. Its registered mailing address traced back to a suite 3 floors below a private investment firm long associated with Victoria's personal network. Rebecca leaned back, exhaling slowly. She opened her laptop and drafted a second email to Danielle. Subject: Governance Threshold Clarification. The message was carefully worded. Rebecca did not accuse. She asked procedural questions. She referenced specific authorization limits defined in the company's governance handbook. She hit send. Danielle received the email while seated in her home office overlooking the Hudson. The room was minimalist dark wood desk neutral tones, a framed photograph of her father placed deliberately out of direct sunlight. She read Rebecca's message without visible reaction. Then she logged into the secure governance archive tied to Fisher Capital Trust. The structure was layered. Publicly, Fisher and Langston Holdings operated under a conventional executive hierarchy. CEO title: Board Oversight, Committee Reviews. Privately controlling voting shares remained within the trust. As trustee, Danielle held authority to override executive actions if fiduciary breaches were established. She navigated to the section outlining emergency expenditure approvals. Amounts exceeding $2 million required either full board vote or trustee ratification. The disbursement to Harrington Event Group exceeded that threshold by $800,000. No trustee ratification appeared in the record. Danielle rested her palm lightly against her abdomen. The baby shifted faintly, as if responding to the change in her breathing. She'd opened her notebook. Harrington payment exceeds threshold. No trustee signature. Potential breach fiduciary duty. Her handwriting remained steady. Across town, Victoria sat in her private office reviewing press seating assignments when her assistant knocked softly. Rebecca Lawson requested access to archived vendor files, the assistant said carefully. Victoria paused. For what purpose? She cited routine compliance verification. Victoria's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind her eyes. Grant limited access, she said. Nothing beyond current fiscal year. Yes, ma'am. When the door closed, Victoria stood and walked toward the window. Compliance verification. She had anticipated resistance from Danielle in social arenas, awkward dinners, subtle disagreements. She had not anticipated scrutiny. Danielle, in Victoria's estimation, was too quiet to be strategic, too reserved to be dangerous. Meanwhile, Michael spent the afternoon finalizing his gala speech with the communications team. Focus on growth metrics, his advisor suggested. Investors respond to confidence. Michael nodded. Should we reference the charitable expansion, he asked. Yes, but briefly. Frame it as your mother's initiative. Michael agreed without hesitation. He had not reviewed the underlying financials himself. He trusted the systems already in place. Trust, Danielle knew, was not a substitute for oversight. That evening, she attended a prenatal follow-up appointment. The doctor measured vital signs, reviewed charts. Your stress levels need to remain stable, the doctor said gently. Avoid high-conflict situations. Danielle nodded. Conflict was not her intention. Procedure was. After the appointment, she returned home and drafted a short response to Rebecca. Rebecca, Please preserve all documentation related to Langston Foundation disbursements over the past 12 months. Initiate standard litigation. Hold protocols as precautionary measure. Discretion advised. DF. She reread the message before sending. No accusation, no escalation. Just preservation. Rebecca read the email 20 minutes later and felt a quiet shift. Litigation hold. That term changed context. It meant potential investigation. It meant documents could no longer be altered, deleted, or selectively archived. Rebecca closed her office door and contacted IT security. "We're initiating a hold," she said calmly. "No notifications beyond necessary personnel." "Understood," the technician replied. In the executive wing, Victoria's assistant noticed an internal alert regarding document preservation. She hesitated before forwarding it upward. Victoria read the alert in silence. Litigation hold protocol engaged. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She reached for her phone and dialed Michael. "Are you aware of any compliance review underway?" she asked smoothly. "Compliance review," Michael echoed. "No. Should I be?" "Probably routine," she replied lightly. "Just keep your focus on the gala." After hanging up, Victoria remained seated, calculating. If Danielle was behind this, it was more than social defiance. It was structural. Back at the penthouse, Danielle closed her laptop and stood slowly. Outside, the city lights reflected against the river like fractured constellations. She moved toward the bookshelf and retrieved a leather-bound folder containing the original trust documents. Her father's handwriting lined the margins in faint blue ink. Authority must never be emotional. If challenged, respond with documentation. Never argue where records will suffice. Danielle traced the ink lightly with her finger. She had not intended to activate these mechanisms so early in her marriage. But governance was not personal. It was obligation. She returned the folder to its place and opened her notebook once more. Litigation hold initiated. Victoria alerted monitor response. Prepare for board escalation if resistance continues. She closed the notebook and exhaled slowly. In another part of the city, Victoria poured herself a glass of white wine and reviewed her guest list once more. She believed she was protecting legacy. She did not yet see the architecture shifting beneath her. And in the space between perception and structure, tension gathered, quiet, disciplined, inevitable. The night of the gala unfolded exactly as Victoria Langston had designed it. Light cascaded from the grand chandelier, refracting across marble floors, polished to a mirrored sheen. A string quartet played near the sweeping staircase, their music blending with the low murmur of investors, donors, and executives exchanging curated pleasantries. Press photographers lined the right corridor, lenses poised. Every detail suggested stability. Danielle Fisher entered at 7:42 p.m. She noted the time instinctively. Her pale blue gown was understated, its simplicity contrasting the architectural sharpness of the lobby. She walked slowly, not from hesitation, but from caution. The pregnancy had altered her center of gravity. Her balance required deliberation. Tom Bradley, head of security, noticed her immediately. His earpiece crackled softly. He touched it once and murmured, "She's here." Across the room, Victoria's smile did not falter, but her eyes shifted. Michael was in conversation with two institutional investors when he glanced toward the entrance. His expression brightened reflexively. "Danielle," he said under his breath, excusing himself. But Victoria intercepted him before he could move. "Finish this discussion," she whispered firmly. "We cannot appear disorganized." Michael hesitated. The investors were watching. He nodded and resumed speaking. Danielle continued forward, greeting a few board members with quiet nods. Rebecca Lawson caught her eye from near the back of the hall. There was a question in Rebecca's expression, not fear, but awareness. Danielle offered the smallest reassurance with a calm look. She had no intention of disrupting the evening. She simply intended to attend. Victoria approached her with the grace of someone accustomed to controlling optics. "You weren't scheduled to arrive until later," she said pleasantly. "I wasn't aware I needed a schedule," Danielle replied evenly. Victoria's lips curved, but the warmth did not reach her eyes. This event is carefully structured. Investors expect clarity. Danielle placed a hand lightly against her abdomen, steady. Clarity is important. Victoria's gaze dropped to the gesture. You should be resting, she said, not standing under camera lights. I feel fine. Victoria exhaled through her nose, a quiet signal. Tom Bradley stepped closer, posture formal. Danielle noticed the shift immediately. Security positioning had tightened. Tom, Victoria said, voice calm but carrying authority. I believe Mrs. Langston is unwell. Please escort her somewhere private. Danielle looked at Tom directly. I am not unwell. Tom hesitated. He respected protocol, but he also answered to executive command. Victoria's tone cooled. Escort her out. Now. The word now landed with quiet precision. Several nearby guests turned. Cameras adjusted instinctively toward the subtle tension. Tom placed a careful hand near Danielle's arm. Ma'am, he said not unkindly, please come with me. Danielle did not pull away. She looked toward Michael. He was mid-sentence with an investor unaware of the escalation. Victoria had positioned herself strategically between him and the unfolding moment. Victoria Danielle said softly, this isn't necessary. It absolutely is. Victoria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We will not have distractions tonight. Tom's grip tightened slightly, not forceful but directive. Danielle felt the shift in balance. Her heel caught against the polished floor. The room's murmurs sharpened. Please, she said quietly, one hand instinctively moving to protect her abdomen. Don't push. The words were not dramatic. They were factual. Victoria's expression hardened. Remove her. This time there was no ambiguity. Tom and another guard moved in coordinated motion. Danielle was guided, then pulled toward the entrance corridor. The quartet faltered mid-phrase. A champagne flute shattered somewhere behind them. Michael finally turned. What's happening? He called out. Victoria stepped beside him immediately. She's overwhelmed, she said smoothly. Emotional. It's better this way. Michael saw Danielle being escorted toward the doors. His confusion registered as frustration. Danielle, he called, but he did not move. Not yet. In the corridor, the grip on Danielle's arm tightened as cameras flashed behind them. She did not resist. She memorized. 7:49 p.m. Security contact initiated. Witnesses, board members Adler, Kim, Ruiz. Press present. Outside, cold air struck her face sharply. Tom released her once they reached the steps. I'm sorry, he muttered under his breath. Danielle steadied herself against the railing. It's noted, she replied. The doors closed behind her with a heavy finality. Inside, Victoria resumed composure instantly. Apologies for the brief interruption, she announced lightly into the microphone. Family matters. As I was saying, continuity requires focus. Polite applause followed, uneasy but compliant. Michael stood beside her, jaw tight. She didn't look overwhelmed, he said quietly. Victoria's voice lowered just enough for him alone. She is pregnant, Michael. Hormones distort perception. You cannot risk the company's image for sentiment. He swallowed. Optics? Investors were watching. He forced a nod. Outside, Danielle remained still for several moments. The cold stabilized her breathing. A security camera above the entrance blinked red. She looked directly at it. Documentation. Her phone vibrated softly. Rebecca, are you all right? Danielle typed carefully. I am fine. Please secure all entrance camera footage from 7:48 p.m. tonight, discreetly. Rebecca responded almost immediately. Understood. Danielle slid the phone back into her clutch. A car idled near the curb. She descended the steps, slowly aware of each movement. The baby shifted again, restless. She placed her palm there, grounding herself. This was no longer about insult. It was about breach. Back inside, whispers spread across the hall. Board member Samuel Adler leaned toward Rebecca. That looked unnecessary, he murmured. Rebecca's voice remained neutral. Procedures are being reviewed. Victoria maintained her poise through the remainder of the program. But beneath the practiced elegance, calculation accelerated. If Danielle intended to challenge authority, tonight had forced escalation. Michael finished his speech to polite applause. He searched the room afterward. Danielle was gone. He texted her. "Where are you?" No immediate response. Victoria placed a hand on his arm. "You did well," she said. He nodded distractedly. Outside, Danielle entered the waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away from the building bearing both their family names, she opened her notebook once more. Public removal. Verbal directive witnessed. Security compliance without incident report. Press exposure risk. She underlined one final line. Fiduciary environment compromised by executive misconduct. She closed the notebook. The city lights blurred past the window. Danielle did not cry. She did not tremble. She simply shifted from endurance to action. Inside the gala hall, applause faded into curated laughter. Legacy had been preserved visibly, but in quiet digital archives, records were already being secured. And records, unlike reputation, did not bend to narrative. Danielle did not go home. Halfway across the bridge, a tightening gripped her lower abdomen, sharp enough to interrupt her breath. "Turn around," she told the driver calmly. "Mount Sinai." The driver glanced at her through the rear-view mirror, alarm flickering briefly in his eyes. He nodded and changed direction without question. In the emergency obstetrics unit, everything moved quickly but quietly. Monitors were attached, blood pressure taken. A nurse asked measured questions in a voice trained to soothe. "Did you fall into any abdominal impact?" Danielle paused. "Forceful contact," she answered, but I remained upright. The nurse made a note. Stress-induced uterine tightening, the attending physician later explained. No immediate harm detected. But stress had consequences, especially in the second trimester. "You need stability," the doctor said gently. "Emotional and physical." Danielle nodded once. Stability was not a feeling. It was a system. When she was finally left alone in the dim recovery room, the steady rhythm of the fetal heartbeat echoed softly from the monitor beside her. She watched the numbers without blinking. At 9:26 p.m., her phone vibrated. Rebecca. Footage preserved. Audio logs from security channel also secured. IT confirmed no deletions. Danielle typed back slowly. "Initiate formal documentation of incident. Timestamp everything. We will require chain of custody certification." There was a pause before Rebecca responded. "Understood." In the gala hall, the evening had resumed its curated elegance. Wine flowed, speeches concluded. Photographs captured smiling faces beneath engraved stone. But subtle fractures were spreading. Samuel Adler had approached Michael near the bar. "Everything all right with Danielle?" he asked carefully. Michael forced a tight smile. "Just pregnancy fatigue." Adler's brow furrowed faintly. It looked more forceful than that. Michael did not answer. Victoria joined them before the silence stretched. "She insisted on attending against advice," Victoria said lightly. "We prioritized her health." Her tone invited agreement. Adler nodded politely but said nothing further. Across the room, Rebecca observed. She had already received confirmation from IT that the security radio transmissions had been archived before standard overwrite intervals could erase them. One segment stood out, Victoria's voice unmistakable despite the low volume. "Escort her out. Now." The word "now" was clipped. Directive. Rebecca closed her laptop slowly. There would be no ambiguity. Near midnight, Michael finally called Danielle directly. She answered on the third ring. "Where are you?" he asked, tension replacing earlier confidence. "At the hospital." Silence. "What monitoring?" she said. "The baby is stable." He exhaled sharply. "Why didn't you tell me you were giving a speech? That's not fair." Danielle looked at the ceiling tiles above her hospital bed. "Fairness isn't the issue." Michael's voice softened. "Mom said you were overwhelmed." "I wasn't." Another silence, heavier this time. They grabbed you, he said slowly as if replaying the memory in clearer resolution. Yes. Why didn't you fight back? Danielle's gaze shifted to the monitor. Because fighting back in a marble lobby does not create accountability. Records do. Michael did not understand the full meaning of her answer. Not yet. I'll come now, he said. There's no need, she replied calmly. Stay, finish your obligations. The phrasing unsettled him. Obligations. After ending the call, Danielle opened her notebook. Hospital admission, 9:18 p.m. stress episode documented. Physician notes external force acknowledged. She underlined physician notes twice. If governance was compromised, personal harm elevated it beyond corporate misconduct. At 12:07 a.m., Rebecca emailed her again. We have preliminary financial irregularities linked to Langston Foundation disbursements. Vendor cross-reference indicates personal association to VL. Awaiting forensic confirmation, Danielle read the message without visible reaction. She responded, engage external forensic accountant immediately. Independent review. Discreet. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before making the call. Daniel Kim had built his career dissecting financial trails others assumed were too complex to follow. He agreed to begin analysis first thing in the morning. Back in her penthouse after discharge, Danielle moved slowly through the darkened living room. Michael was not home yet. She placed her clutch on the kitchen counter and washed her hands deliberately as though cleansing the evening from her skin. In the reflection of the stainless steel appliances, she saw not humiliation, but transition. She retrieved the leather-bound trust folder once more and opened to the section titled Fiduciary Override, Clause 7.3. In the event of demonstrable executive misconduct impacting corporate integrity or beneficiary welfare, trustee retains unilateral authority to initiate corrective action. Beneficiary welfare. Her child qualified. She closed the folder and sat down at her desk. For the first time since the merger, she drafted a formal memorandum, not emotional, not reactive. Subject, notice of governance review. To be delivered to the board within 48 hours. She outlined incident at gala, involving physical removal. Potential breach of fiduciary duty regarding charitable disbursements. Activation of independent forensic audit. Preservation of all relevant communications. She saved the draft without sending it. Timing mattered. Michael returned home just after 1:30 a.m. He entered quietly, removing his jacket with restrained movements. Are you okay? He asked when he saw her seated at the desk. I am stable, she replied. He approached, guilt etched into his posture. I didn't know she would. She did, Danielle interrupted softly. He ran a hand through his hair. She said you were disrupting the flow. Danielle looked at him steadily. I was walking, Michael swallowed. I'll talk to her. Danielle shook her head once. This is no longer a private conversation. He frowned. What does that mean? It means governance is involved. The word landed heavily. Michael stared at her. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Danielle's gaze did not waver. It already is. He exhaled, frustration surfacing. It was one moment. No, she said quietly. It was a directive. Michael fell silent. He remembered the tone, the word now. For the first time, doubt crept into his certainty. Danielle closed her notebook. Get some rest, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. After he disappeared into the bedroom, Danielle remained at the desk. She sent one final message to Rebecca. Proceed with full audit scope. Include executive authorization patterns over past 12 months. Rebecca's response came within minutes. Understood. This will escalate. Danielle looked out at the sleeping city. Escalation was not anger. It was structure correcting imbalance. She placed both hands over her abdomen, feeling the steady warmth beneath her palms. You are safe, she whispered, not to reassure herself, but to affirm intention. In another part of Manhattan, Victoria sat alone in her office reviewing press coverage. Headlines praised the gala's success. No mention yet of the removal. She believed the moment had been contained. She did not know that within encrypted servers and secured archives, containment had already shifted away from her control. And by morning, numbers would begin to speak. By morning, the gala had already been reduced to headlines. Langston Air signals confident expansion. Fisher and Langston strengthens philanthropic commitment. Photographs captured Michael mid-speech. Victoria poised beside him, crystal chandeliers casting legitimacy across the frame. No image showed Danielle being escorted out. But absence did not equal erasure. At 8:15 a.m., Daniel Kim entered a private conference room on the 32nd floor of headquarters. He carried no dramatic briefcase, no theatrical air of investigation. Just a laptop, a notepad, and a reputation for precision. Rebecca Lawson met him at the door. "Full discretion," she said quietly. "Always," Daniel replied. Inside, IT had already prepared a secure terminal isolated from general network access. The litigation hold Danielle had ordered ensured that no relevant emails, payment records, or internal messages could be altered without leaving trace signatures. Daniel began with the Langston Foundation Initiative accounts. The first layer showed nothing alarming charitable disbursements aligned with public announcements. Grant summaries, event sponsorships, community outreach. The second layer required deeper parsing. Vendor ID Harrington Event Group. Payments over 12 months, $8.6 million. Standard review threshold exceeded on 3 occasions. Daniel clicked into the authorization metadata. Executive approval V. Langston. No secondary sign-off. No trustee ratification code. Daniel murmured. Rebecca leaned forward. "That's what concerned me." Daniel adjusted his glasses and began reconstructing the financial trail backward: source accounts, routing patterns, subsidiary transfers. "Run relational mapping," he requested. The screen populated with nodes and connections. Harrington Event Group linked to a shell entity registered in Delaware. That entity's principal listed an attorney who had previously represented Victoria's personal investment portfolio. Rebecca's jaw tightened slightly. "Conflict of interest?" she asked. "Potentially more," Daniel said evenly. "Let's not assume. Let's confirm." Across the city, Danielle sat at her home office desk, reviewing overnight updates. Her posture was upright but deliberate. The stress episode had left a faint ache beneath her ribs. Michael had left early without breakfast. He had kissed her temple before leaving, his expression unsettled. "I'll speak to Mom," he had said again. Danielle had not responded. Now her phone vibrated with Rebecca's encrypted message. "Forensic review underway. Initial irregularities confirmed. Conflict risk elevated." Danielle closed her eyes briefly. Not vindication, validation. She opened her notebook. 8:32 a.m. forensic audit initiated. Vendor relational mapping pending. Executive override clause likely applicable. She did not underline anything this time. At headquarters, Victoria entered the executive suite precisely at 9. Her assistant trailed behind, listing morning engagements. "There's a compliance team in Conference B," the assistant added carefully. "Compliance," Victoria repeated. "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca Lawson authorized a review. Victoria's expression did not change. "Of what I wasn't informed." Victoria nodded once. "Cancel my 10 o'clock. I'll address this." She moved toward Conference B without haste. Inside, Daniel Kim continued navigating transaction logs. 3 disbursements were labeled branding acceleration, he said. Yet corresponding marketing outputs are minimal. Rebecca folded her hands. "Can you trace fund redistribution?" Daniel clicked deeper. Funds transferred from Harrington Event Group to a consultancy account. From there, partial redistribution to a private equity vehicle. He stopped. "That vehicle holds minority shares in a renewable startup," he said. Rebecca frowned. "And that startup was publicly endorsed by Victoria at last quarter's investor call." The door opened. Victoria Langston stepped in, composed as ever. "I was not aware of an audit being conducted," she said smoothly. Rebecca stood. Standard compliance review. Victoria's gaze shifted to Daniel. "And you are Daniel Kim, independent forensic consultant." Victoria's smile was polite but edged. I trust you're aware that discretionary philanthropic decisions fall within executive purview. Danielle met her gaze without hostility. Discretionary within thresholds, yes. 3 transactions exceeded those limits. Victoria's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. I authorized them for strategic reasons. Without trustee ratification, Rebecca added. A beat of silence. Victoria turned toward Rebecca. Trustee ratification is procedural redundancy. It is binding, Rebecca replied evenly. Victoria's posture stiffened. I will discuss this with Michael. Daniel closed his laptop briefly. Before you do, he said calmly, be aware that litigation hold protocols are active. Alterations at this stage would create additional exposure. The air shifted. Victoria held his gaze for 3 seconds too long. I have nothing to alter, she said. She left the room without another word. Rebecca exhaled slowly. She didn't expect documentation, she murmured. Daniel reopened his laptop. People rarely do. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his corner office staring at his phone. He had replayed the gala moment repeatedly in his mind. Danielle's voice, please don't push. His mother's voice, remove her. He had not moved quickly enough. His phone rang. Victoria. Michael, she began. Voice measured, there's an overreach happening. Compliance has initiated a review without consulting us. Without consulting us, he echoed. Yes, Danielle may be influencing this. Michael frowned. Why would she? Because she misinterpreted last night. He leaned back in his chair. She went to the hospital. A pause. For stress, Victoria replied dismissively, which she would have avoided had she rested. Michael felt something shift internally. That's not what I saw. What you saw, Victoria said calmly, was me protecting the company. Michael ended the call without promising agreement. Across the river, Danielle received a second update from Rebecca. Relational mapping confirms indirect investment loop benefiting entity publicly endorsed by VL conflict exposure significant. Danielle inhaled slowly. She placed both hands flat against her desk. Conflict of interest elevated to self-dealing risk. Her father's voice seemed to echo in memory. Never accuse, prove. She opened a secure drafting platform and began composing a formal notice of special board meeting. Grounds cited. Documented physical removal incident involving executive authority misuse. Financial irregularities exceeding authorization thresholds. Potential breach of fiduciary duty and conflict of interest. She scheduled the notice for release at 9:00 a.m. the following day. Not immediate, deliberate. Back at headquarters, Daniel finished his initial summary. 3 transactions totaling $8.6 million, routed through affiliated entity with beneficial overlap. Insufficient disclosure. Rebecca nodded. Prepare full report. We'll need it ready. For board review, Daniel asked. For governance correction, she replied. Victoria stood alone in her office staring at the skyline. She had built networks, curated influence, maintained narrative control for decades. She believed authority flowed through visibility. She did not yet understand that the foundation beneath her was shifting not through confrontation, but through documentation. That afternoon, Michael returned home early. Danielle was seated at the dining table reviewing printed pages. He noticed the stack immediately. What is that? He asked. Preparation, she replied. For what? She met his eyes steadily. For accountability? Michael swallowed. You're escalating this. No, Danielle said softly. I'm responding proportionally. He stepped closer. This could damage everything. Danielle closed the folder gently. Damage occurs when misconduct remains unaddressed. He had no immediate answer. Silence filled the room, not hostile, but clarifying. Outside, the city moved with ordinary urgency. Inside, records accumulated. And in the quiet architecture of governance, the slow burn continued. The notice of special board meeting was released at exactly 9:00 a.m. No dramatic language. No accusations in bold. Just structure. Subject, convening of special board session. governance review attached were 3 documents. Incident summary, gala event with timestamps, preliminary forensic findings, Langston Foundation disbursements, invocation of trustee review authority under Fisher Capital Trust. The email was addressed to all 9 voting board members, general counsel, and outside counsel. Michael received it while standing in the elevator. He read it once, then again. Trustee Review Authority. The words felt unfamiliar in his hands. In conference room A, Rebecca Lawson sat upright, composed. Daniel Kim's expanded financial summary had been finalized at 3:14 a.m. and appended as Exhibit B. At 9:07 a.m., Victoria called an emergency executive huddle. "This is procedural intimidation," she stated calmly, though the tightness in her jaw betrayed something deeper. "Danielle is overstepping." Samuel Adler, oldest member of the board, cleared his throat. "Is she?" he asked. Victoria turned toward him. "She's invoking trustee authority over an operational matter." Adler folded his hands. "The trust holds majority voting shares." Victoria's gaze sharpened. "Voting shares do not grant day-to-day interference." Rebecca spoke evenly from across the table. "They do grant override in cases of fiduciary risk." Silence. Michael entered the room mid-sentence, holding his tablet. "I just read the notice," he said. His voice was steady, but something beneath it had shifted. Doubt had replaced assumption. Victoria turned to him immediately. "This is unnecessary escalation," she said. "Tell them." Michael did not respond right away. Instead, he asked, "Were the disbursements within threshold?" Victoria paused. "They were strategic. That wasn't my question." Rebecca slid a copy of the financial summary across the table toward Michael. "The amounts exceeded unilateral executive authorization limits by $800,000 cumulatively," she said. Michael scanned the page. "I wasn't informed," he murmured. "That's precisely the issue," Rebecca replied. Across town, Danielle prepared differently. She did not rehearse speeches. She reviewed documents. She wore a charcoal suit instead of a dress, flat shoes instead of heels. The pregnancy had made balance more important than appearance. Before leaving the penthouse, she placed her palm gently against her abdomen. Order, she whispered, not as a command, but as intention. At 10:00 a.m., board members gathered. Conference room A felt colder than usual. Glass walls reflected tense faces. Danielle entered last. No one stopped her. Tom Bradley stood outside the room but did not interfere. He had received updated protocol that morning. Security actions now required documented authorization during governance proceedings. Victoria noticed that change immediately. Danielle took her seat at the far end of the table. She did not sit beside Michael. She placed a leather folder in front of her and folded her hands calmly. Rebecca opened the meeting. This session has been convened under trustee authority pursuant to Section 7.3 of Fisher Capital Trust governance structure. Victoria exhaled softly. "Before we proceed," she said, "I would like to clarify that this appears to be an emotional response to a private family matter." Danielle lifted her eyes. "The hospital report has been entered as Exhibit C," she said quietly. Victoria's composure flickered for half a second. Rebecca continued. "First item incident at gala on record. Timestamp directive captured via security audio channel." Daniel Kim connected his laptop to the display screen. A waveform appeared. The room remained silent as audio played. Victoria's voice measured unmistakable escort her out. "Now." No context softened it. No explanation followed. The room absorbed it. Samuel Adler adjusted his glasses slowly. That directive was not logged in incident reports, he noted. Rebecca nodded. No internal report was filed. Victoria straightened. She was unstable. I acted in her interest. Danielle did not react to the phrasing. She opened her folder and slid a printed medical summary across the table. "Stress-induced uterine episode," she said. "External force acknowledged." Michael's face drained slightly of color. Victoria's expression hardened. "You're implying harm. I'm documenting impact," Danielle replied. Rebecca shifted to the second agenda item. Forensic review of Langston Foundation disbursements. Daniel projected the financial mapping. Lines connected vendor to shell entity to investment vehicle to renewable startup, previously endorsed by Victoria during an earnings call. Beneficial overlap confirmed, Daniel said evenly. Disclosure insufficient. Victoria leaned forward. That investment was strategic positioning. It was not disclosed as a self-associated, Rebecca replied. Michael spoke for the first time since audio playback. Did you benefit financially? He asked his mother quietly. Victoria turned toward him. I benefited the company. That's not what I asked. The air tightened. Danielle watched without expression. This was not vindication. It was exposure. Samuel Adler cleared his throat again. The issue before us is fiduciary duty, not narrative. Danielle finally spoke more than a sentence. The trust was structured to prevent concentration of unchecked authority, she said. This is precisely that scenario. Victoria's gaze locked onto her. You planned this. Danielle did not answer the accusation. She opened another document. Board Resolution 14B. Transfer of majority voting shares to Fisher Capital Trust. Trustee, Danielle Fisher. Rebecca read aloud the operative clause. In the event of demonstrable executive misconduct impacting corporate integrity or beneficiary welfare, trustee retains unilateral authority to initiate corrective action. Michael looked at Danielle slowly. You never told me, he said. You never asked, she replied gently. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was clarifying. Samuel Adler spoke carefully. What corrective action are you invoking? Danielle's voice remained steady. Immediate suspension of discretionary financial authority pending full independent audit. Temporary removal of executive signatory privileges where conflict risk is established. Victoria's chair shifted sharply against the floor. You cannot remove me from my own company. Danielle met her eyes. It is not removal. It is suspension pending review. Michael looked between them. Mom, he said softly, why wasn't I informed about the vendor relationship? Victoria's composure cracked, not in volume, but in tone. Because you would have hesitated. The admission settled heavily. Rebecca closed her folder. We require a vote. 9 members. Majority needed. Hands lifted slowly, one by one. Adler, Ruiz, Kim, Patterson. Michael hesitated. Danielle did not look at him. After 3 long seconds, his hand rose. Victoria watched it as if it were a betrayal. The final count confirmed suspension of Victoria's discretionary financial authority pending independent investigation. No applause, no shouting, just record. Rebecca documented the vote in the minutes. Danielle closed her folder. She did not smile. She did not look triumphant. She simply said, "Thank you for prioritizing governance." Victoria stood. This is not over. Danielle nodded once. Correct. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through corridors, unaware that power had shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but structurally. Michael remained seated after the others stood. He looked at Danielle differently now, not as distraction, not as emotional variable, but as architect. You could have warned me, he said quietly. Danielle gathered her papers. I tried, she replied. He thought of the notebook, the silence, the calm. He realized too late that her restraint had not been weakness. It had been preparation. As Danielle exited the room, Tom Bradley stepped aside respectfully. No one touched her arm. No one directed her path. The building that had expelled her days earlier now opened without resistance. Inside the conference room, Victoria remained standing alone for a moment longer. For the first time in decades, narrative had not been enough. Documentation had spoken, and it had not raised its voice. Suspension did not make headlines, not immediately. The board minutes were sealed pending full investigation. Public statements were limited to a carefully worded release. Fisher and Langston Holdings initiates internal governance review to reinforce compliance standards. No names, no accusations. But internally, the atmosphere changed overnight. Access permissions were revised. Executive signatory authority was temporarily redistributed. Finance staff received updated instructions requiring dual verification on discretionary transfers. Tom Bradley received a direct memo from Rebecca Lawson. All security directives involving board members required written authorization and incident logging. Procedure tightened. Victoria noticed each adjustment. She arrived at headquarters the next morning expecting quiet deference. Instead, her executive assistant met her at the door with visible discomfort. "Your building access requires temporary revalidation," the assistant said softly. Victoria's expression did not shift, but the pause lingered half a second too long. "On whose authority?" she asked. "Board directive." Victoria extended her badge without comment. The scanner blinked amber before turning green. Temporary revalidation. It was symbolic, but symbols mattered. On the 32nd floor, Daniel Kim continued his forensic review. What had begun as threshold exceedance had expanded into pattern analysis. He now mapped email metadata alongside financial authorizations. One particular thread stood out. Subject, strategic acceleration. Victoria had forwarded an internal memo to Harrington Event Group prior to board approval. The wording suggested expectation of reimbursement through foundation channels. Rebecca leaned over Daniel's shoulder. "Pre-authorization." "Looks that way," Daniel replied. Funds were anticipated before approval existed. Rebecca exhaled slowly. "That complicates things." Meanwhile, Michael sat alone in his office staring at a printed copy of the trust resolution. He had asked Rebecca for it after the vote. He read the language again. Trustee retains unilateral authority in cases of fiduciary breach. Trustee Danielle Fisher. His wife. He realized he had never asked detailed questions about the merger structure. He had assumed equal partnership meant visible parity. He had confused title with authority. At noon, he requested a private meeting with Danielle. She agreed. They met in a smaller conference room overlooking the river. Danielle sat first posture upright, but relaxed. She placed her notebook on the table without opening it. Michael remained standing for a moment before sitting across from her. "You've been trustee since before we married," he began. "Yes, and you never thought to explain." Danielle folded her hands. "The structure was public record. You never reviewed it." "That's not the same." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." He ran a hand across his jaw. "You let me believe I was running the company." "You were operating it," she corrected, "not governing it." He stared at her. "That sounds like semantics." "It isn't." Michael leaned back, struggling to reconcile pride with reality. "Why didn't you tell me when Mom started making decisions?" Danielle's eyes did not waver. "I was observing whether it was oversight or intent." "And now?" "Now there's documentation." He fell silent. He remembered the gala, the grip on her arm. Her voice, "Please don't push." "I failed you," he said quietly. Danielle's expression softened, but not sentimentally. "You deferred," she replied. "There's a difference." Before he could respond, Rebecca knocked lightly and entered. "Apologies," she said. "There's a development." She placed a tablet on the table between them. On the screen was an email draft recovered from executive archives, unsent but preserved by the litigation hold. From V. Langston to Harrington Event Group subject. Alignment text, proceed. I will secure board endorsement retroactively. Michael read it twice. His jaw tightened. Retroactively, he murmured. Danielle watched him absorb it. "This predates the gala," Rebecca said evenly. "Pattern spans 12 months. Michael exhaled slowly. "Does this rise to legal exposure?" he asked. Rebecca chose her words carefully. "Potentially. Self-dealing without disclosure carries regulatory risk." Silence filled the room. Danielle closed her notebook gently. "Next step," Michael asked, voice lower now. "Full independent report," Rebecca replied. "Then external disclosure if required." Michael nodded once. After Rebecca left, he looked at Danielle differently. "Are you going to remove her entirely?" he asked. Danielle paused before answering. "I will follow the trust obligations. That's not an answer. It is, she said softly. Later that afternoon, another discovery surfaced. Daniel Kim had traced a secondary transfer from the shell entity to a private account held jointly under a limited liability company, Langston Strategic Ventures. Victoria's signature appeared on its formation documents. Rebecca felt the shift in her chest when Daniel showed her the file. That crosses from governance into personal gain, she said. Indirect but traceable. Daniel confirmed. Rebecca drafted a supplemental memorandum to the board. Subject, expanded findings, potential self-dealing exposure. At 4:18 p.m., Danielle received the update. She read it without outward reaction. Then she placed both hands flat on her desk and closed her eyes briefly. This was no longer about the gala. It was about structural abuse. She opened her notebook and wrote secondary transfer confirmed. Self-benefit exposure, escalation unavoidable. In another wing of the building, Victoria reviewed the public relations draft regarding the governance review. Too vague, she said sharply. We must emphasize continuity. Her communications director hesitated. The board may require transparency beyond this. Victoria's gaze sharpened. The board is confused. She stood and walked toward the elevator. She had not yet spoken directly to Danielle since the vote. That would change. Minutes later, Danielle's office door opened without knock. Victoria entered alone. Rebecca, seated nearby reviewing documents, rose instinctively. I'll step out, she said. Danielle nodded once. The door closed. Victoria remained standing. You've orchestrated quite a spectacle, she said evenly. Danielle remained seated. There has been no spectacle. You've humiliated this family. Documentation is not humiliation. Victoria's composure flickered. You think governance is morality? I think governance is protection, for whom Danielle placed her palm lightly against her abdomen. For beneficiaries. Victoria followed the gesture. Her voice hardened. You would dismantle legacy over technicalities. Danielle met her eyes. Over breaches. A long silence settled between them. Victoria studied her, truly studied her for the first time. You've been planning this, she said quietly. Danielle shook her head once. I've been recording. The distinction hung in the air. Victoria turned toward the door. This will fracture more than you anticipate. Danielle did not respond. When Victoria left, the office felt heavier but clearer. Rebecca re-entered moments later. Are you all right? She asked. Yes, Danielle said. Rebecca hesitated. The supplemental report will trigger mandatory disclosure thresholds. Danielle nodded. Prepare it. Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the river. Inside Fisher and Langston Holdings, documentation accumulated into inevitability. No shouting, no spectacle, just record after record aligning. And as the evidence solidified, power continued shifting not loudly, not vindictively, but irreversibly. By the time the supplemental report was finalized, the issue could no longer be contained within internal language. Potential self-dealing exposure. The phrase appeared 3 times in Daniel Kim's expanded findings. It appeared once in Rebecca Lawson's memorandum to the board. It did not appear in any public statement. Not yet. Danielle reviewed the final draft in her office just after sunrise. The city beyond the window was pale and quiet, softened by early light. She read each page without rushing, verifying citations, cross-checking transaction IDs, confirming that every assertion was anchored in evidence. She made one correction in the margin, not alleged documented. Precision mattered. Across the hall, Michael sat alone in the smaller conference room where he and Danielle had spoken the day before. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gala lobby, the moment of hesitation, when he had chosen stillness over movement. He replayed his mother's voice. Proceed. I will secure board endorsement retroactively. He had built his professional identity on integrity, sustainable investments, ethical growth, transparent expansion. And yet the oversight he prided himself on had been superficial. At 8:30 a.m., the board convened again. Victoria entered with measured calm, wearing a charcoal suit identical in tone to Danielle's the previous day. There was no visible sign of panic, only calculation. Danielle arrived minutes later. She sat without acknowledgement of tension. Rebecca began. Supplemental forensic findings confirm secondary fund transfer benefiting entity associated with Executive Chair Victoria Langston. Disclosure absent in prior board materials. Victoria folded her hands neatly. That investment supported a strategic, renewable venture aligned with our long-term vision, she said. Daniel Kim remained composed. Funds originated from charitable allocation, he clarified. Routing lacked transparent disclosure. Victoria turned toward him. Strategic acceleration sometimes requires discretion. Samuel Adler spoke slowly. Discretion is not exemption. Silence. Michael's voice entered carefully. Mom. Why didn't you disclose the connection? Victoria's gaze softened only slightly when it met her son's. Because disclosure invites hesitation. Hesitation costs advantage. Michael absorbed the words. Advantage for whom? For the company. Daniel did not interrupt. Rebecca continued. Board members must determine whether this constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. Danielle had not yet spoken. She waited, not for permission, for completion. When the room quieted, she opened her folder. Before deliberation, she said calmly, "There's additional context." Rebecca glanced toward her, aware but not surprised. Danielle slid forward a printed email chain recovered from archived executive correspondence. The subject line read, Narrative Management. Victoria's email addressed to Tom Bradley 2 days before the gala ensured Danielle's presence is minimized. We cannot risk conflicting optics. If necessary, remove her discreetly. The room stilled. Michael's breath caught audibly. Victoria's composure fractured for the first time, not visibly but structurally. Her posture tightened, her chin lifted. That was a preventative measure, she said evenly. Danielle's eyes remained steady. It demonstrates intent, Rebecca interjected. The directive aligns with recorded audio from the gala. Samuel Adler leaned back slowly. Intent plus financial non-disclosure, he murmured. Michael stared at the email. You plan to remove her, he said almost to himself. Victoria's voice sharpened. I plan to protect stability. Danielle's voice remained soft, by eliminating oversight. The word hung in the air, oversight. Michael closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the confidence he had worn for years was absent. What are you invoking now? He asked Danielle. She met his gaze. Trustee corrective authority. Victoria's chair scraped faintly against the floor. You will not strip me of executive role. Danielle did not respond emotionally. She turned to Rebecca. Please read Clause 7.3 in full. Rebecca complied. In the event of demonstrable executive misconduct impacting corporate integrity or beneficiary welfare, trustee retains unilateral authority to initiate corrective action, including temporary removal from executive function pending independent review. Victoria laughed softly, without warmth. You would use your pregnancy as leverage. Danielle's voice did not rise. I am using documentation. Michael looked at his mother. You endangered her. Victoria's eyes flashed. I preserved legacy. Michael's reply was quiet but final. At what cost, the board requested a closed vote. Danielle stepped outside with Rebecca while deliberation occurred. In the hallway, Rebecca spoke softly. If they confirm removal, regulatory disclosure becomes mandatory. Danielle nodded. I'm aware. Rebecca hesitated. This will be public. Yes. Inside the conference room, voices remained controlled but strained. Adler summarized. Evidence establishes pattern of undisclosed financial routing and premeditated exclusion of trustee oversight. One by one, votes were cast. When Danielle was invited back in, the outcome was already recorded. Rebecca spoke. By majority vote, Victoria Langston is relieved of executive authority, effective immediately pending full investigation and external reporting review. No applause, no visible relief, just record. Victoria stood slowly. You mistake restraint for righteousness, she said quietly to Danielle. Danielle met her gaze without hostility. Restraint is structure. Victoria turned to Michael. You allowed this. Michael's voice did not waver. No, I ignored it. The difference settled heavily. Victoria exited without further comment. The door closed behind her with a controlled finality. Danielle remained standing for a moment longer than necessary. Not in triumph. In transition, Rebecca began outlining next steps. External counsel will coordinate voluntary disclosure to regulators. Internal communication draft pending approval. Daniel Kim added, full audit report will be delivered within 72 hours. Michael remained seated. He watched Danielle as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You were never peripheral, he said quietly when the others began to disperse. No, she replied gently. I was patient. He nodded slowly. I should have stood up in that lobby. Danielle did not absolve him. You should have. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, not reconciled. Just honest. Outside the glass walls, employees continued their routines. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Markets fluctuated. Inside the governance records of Fisher and Langston Holdings Authority had shifted definitively. Not because of anger, not because of humiliation, because documentation had aligned with obligation. Danielle gathered her folder. She paused only once, placing her palm lightly against her abdomen. Beneficiary welfare. Clause 7.3 had not been theoretical. It had been necessary. As she exited the conference room, Tom Bradley stood aside once more. This time, he lowered his head slightly. Respect, not instruction. Downstairs, the lobby looked unchanged. Marble polished, chandelier bright. No sign remained of the night she had been removed. But the structure above it had transformed. And structure, Danielle knew, determined permanence. Removal from executive authority did not silence Victoria Langston. It repositioned her. Within 48 hours, discreet calls began circulating through her private network. Longtime donors, philanthropic partners, select media contacts who owed favors accumulated over decades. The narrative she offered was subtle. A temporary governance misunderstanding. An overzealous compliance interpretation. A young trustee overwhelmed by personal circumstances. She did not accuse Danielle directly. She implied instability. Meanwhile, inside Fisher and Langston Holdings, the compliance process intensified. External counsel Grant and Holloway LLP arrived Monday morning with 2 senior partners and a junior associate tasked with documentation control. Their mandate was clear independent verification of internal findings and preparation for voluntary regulatory disclosure. Danielle met them in conference room C. She did not lead the meeting emotionally. She outlined process, full access to financial logs, email archives, and board minutes, she said evenly. Chain of custody documentation attached. The senior partner, Olivia Grant, studied her with professional respect. Understood. Michael sat 2 seats away, silent. He had spent the weekend reviewing documents Rebecca had forwarded, vendor histories, approval matrices, the trust governance structure he had never examined closely before. He was not defensive now. He was learning. During the second hour of review, Olivia paused. There's evidence of narrative management, she said carefully. Internal communications suggest intent to control perception of trustee authority. Danielle nodded. Yes. Michael looked at her. I should have recognized that, he said quietly. Danielle did not soften the truth. You chose comfort. He accepted the statement without argument. Across town, Victoria met with a private communications advisor in a quiet midtown office. This can be reframed, the advisor said. Stress-induced overreaction. Family dispute escalated publicly. Victoria's posture remained flawless. Do not frame it as dispute, she corrected. Frame it as succession tension. The advisor nodded. Will you contest the board decision? Victoria paused. I will protect legacy. Protection for her had always meant control. Back at headquarters, an internal memo circulated from Rebecca's office, subject commitment to governance transparency. It emphasized compliance, fiduciary responsibility, and employee safety protocols. It did not mention names. But employees felt the shift. Security directives were updated in writing. Incident reporting channels clarified. Executive signatory privileges now required documented oversight. Tom Bradley read the revised protocol carefully. He replayed the gala in his mind, the hesitation, the directive, Danielle's steady voice asking not to be pushed. He had followed instruction. He had not questioned authority. Now, authority had been redefined. That afternoon, Danielle requested a private meeting with Human Resources and the Security Department. Michael attended without speaking unless addressed. Danielle began calmly. I want documented assurance that no employee will execute physical removal of any board member or executive without written authorization and recorded cause. HR Director Patricia Wells nodded. We're revising policy accordingly. Tom Bradley cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said carefully, if I may. Danielle looked at him. Yes, I acted under executive directive. I'm aware, she replied. I regret the outcome. Danielle's expression did not shift into sentiment. Regret is not policy, she said gently. Process is. Tom nodded once. Message received. Later, as Danielle walked back toward her office, she felt the familiar tightening in her lower abdomen, not pain, but reminder. She paused near the window, overlooking the river. The baby shifted. Stability, she reminded herself, was system-wide. Rebecca joined her moments later. External counsel recommends voluntary disclosure within 10 days, she said. It strengthens credibility. Danielle nodded. Prepare it. Rebecca hesitated. Public exposure will invite scrutiny beyond Victoria. Danielle met her gaze. Then we ensure everything withstands it. There was no tremor in her voice. That evening, Michael returned home earlier than usual. The penthouse felt quieter now, not tense but reflective. He found Danielle seated at the dining table reviewing draft disclosure language. He remained standing for a moment before speaking. Are you leaving me? He asked. It was the first time the question had surfaced directly. Danielle closed the document slowly. This is not about leaving, she said. It feels like it. She considered him carefully. Trust requires awareness, she replied. You were unaware. He exhaled, eyes lowering. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting comfort. The difference lingered between them. He moved to sit across from her. Is there a way back? He asked quietly. Danielle did not answer immediately. Instead, she placed her hand over her abdomen again, a habit now grounding and instinctive. There is a way forward, she said, but it will not resemble what we had. Michael nodded slowly. He understood that forgiveness was not performance. It was reconstruction. Across the city, Victoria read the draft internal memo circulated to employees. She saw her absence in it. No title, no acknowledgement. For the first time, isolation touched her not publicly, but structurally. She picked up her phone and dialed Michael. He answered, Michael. She began, voice steady, this company is ours. He closed his eyes briefly. It's governed, he replied. You're choosing her. I'm choosing compliance. Silence. You're naive, she said softly. Maybe, he replied. But I won't be blind. When the call ended, Victoria remained seated for a long time. She had underestimated Danielle's restraint. She had mistaken silence for passivity. Inside Fisher and Langston Holdings, the architecture of authority had stabilized into new alignment. Not louder, stronger. The following morning, Danielle convened one final internal meeting before regulatory disclosure. She addressed senior management without theatrics. We are correcting structure, she said, not rewriting history. Transparency is not punishment. It is protection. No one challenged her. No one needed to. When the meeting adjourned, employees left with something unfamiliar but steady. Clarity. Danielle returned to her office alone. She opened her notebook not to document conflict, but to close a chapter. Gala directive addressed. Financial breach documented. Corrective authority executed. Disclosure pending. She hesitated before adding one final line. Silence is no longer required. She closed the notebook gently. Outside, the river moved without urgency. Inside, governance held. And for the first time since the gala, Danielle felt something settle, not triumph, not relief. Alignment. The voluntary disclosure was filed on a Tuesday morning at 8:03 a.m. Grant and Holloway transmitted the documentation simultaneously to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to primary institutional stakeholders. The language was measured technical, unembellished. Fisher and Langston Holdings has identified irregularities in charitable disbursement authorizations and has initiated corrective governance measures, including temporary removal of executive authority pending independent review. No adjectives, no blame, just record. By 8:17 a.m., financial media had begun requesting comment. By 9:02 a.m., internal inboxes flooded with employee inquiries. Danielle remained in her office reviewing the final confirmation receipt from external counsel. Regulatory acknowledgement logged. She closed the email window calmly. This was no longer internal. This was permanent record. Across the building, Michael stood in front of a live internal broadcast camera prepared by corporate communications. He had insisted on addressing employees personally. The red light blinked on. He inhaled once. Transparency strengthens institutions, he began. Recent findings require us to reaffirm our commitment to fiduciary integrity. We are cooperating fully with independent review. He did not mention his mother by name. He did not deflect responsibility. He did not dramatize. When the broadcast ended, he removed the microphone with steady hands. He found Danielle in the hallway afterward. "That was measured," she said quietly. He nodded. "I should have measured things sooner." She did not contradict him. Inside Conference Room B, external counsel presented the formalized forensic findings to the full board. Daniel Kim displayed the financial maps one final time. Funds originating from Langston Foundation Initiative, transferred to Harrington Event Group, routed to Shell entity, partially invested into Langston Strategic Ventures. Disclosure absent at each step, Olivia Grant summarized. The structure indicates undisclosed beneficial overlap, an anticipatory authorization intent. While intent to defraud is not explicitly evidenced, fiduciary disclosure obligations were not met. Samuel Adler leaned forward slowly. "Does this require formal regulatory penalty?" Olivia's response was precise. Voluntary disclosure mitigates severity. However, regulatory inquiry remains possible. Victoria attended the meeting remotely via secure video conference. Her image appeared composed, framed by neutral background. When invited to respond, she spoke without visible strain. "I believed strategic acceleration justified discretion," she said. "The investment strengthened long-term position." Adler's reply was calm. "Discretion without disclosure is exposure." Victoria's gaze shifted slightly. "You are all overcorrecting," she said. Danielle spoke for the first time in that session. "Correction restores trust." Victoria looked at her directly through the screen. "You will dismantle everything for principle." Danielle did not blink. Principle prevents dismantling. The board moved to formalize permanent removal of Victoria from executive leadership, pending regulatory resolution. Vote recorded. Majority affirmed. Victoria's video feed remained active for several seconds after the vote was logged. She did not speak again. Then the screen went dark. In the hallway outside, Rebecca exhaled quietly. "It's done," she said. Danielle did not respond with relief. "It's documented," she corrected. Later that afternoon, the first financial news article published the story with restrained framing. Fisher and Langston announces internal governance review following charitable fund irregularities. Analysts speculated. Markets dipped slightly before stabilizing. Inside the penthouse that evening, the atmosphere felt altered. Michael stood by the window, watching the skyline. "My mother built networks for decades," he said quietly. "Yes," Danielle replied. "She won't forgive this." Danielle considered the word forgive. "This was not personal," she said. "It feels personal, because it involved family," she answered. "But governance cannot yield to that. He turned toward her. Do you regret any of it? Danielle paused. Regret was not the correct framework. No, she said. He nodded once. Later that night, she felt a stronger contraction than before. Not severe, but insistent. Michael drove her to the hospital without argument. In the examination room, the doctor monitored fetal heartbeat carefully. Stress remains a factor, the physician said gently. You must reduce exposure. Danielle absorbed the words. Exposure was unavoidable, but volatility could be managed. Back home after midnight, she sat alone at her desk while Michael slept. She opened her notebook again. Disclosure filed. Board vote finalized. Regulatory inquiry pending. She hesitated before adding, health variable requires recalibration. She closed the notebook and rested her hands against her abdomen. You are not collateral, she whispered. The following morning, Olivia Grant called with update. SEC acknowledgement received. Inquiry scheduled. Danielle nodded once. Prepare full documentation set. Already in process. In Victoria's private townhouse across the city, silence felt unfamiliar. No assistants, no executive briefings. She sat at her dining table reviewing printed press coverage. Her phone remained face down. She had always believed authority was sustained by presence. Now presence had been suspended. She reached for her phone and typed a single message to Michael. You have chosen sides. He did not respond immediately. Hours later, he sent only, I chose process. Victoria read it twice, then set the phone down. Back at headquarters, Danielle convened a final pre-inquiry meeting with Rebecca and Daniel. Regulators will focus on intent and disclosure patterns, Olivia had advised earlier. Daniel reviewed documentation logs. All metadata preserved, he confirmed. Chain of custody intact. Rebecca looked at Danielle. You understand this could extend months? Danielle nodded. I do. Rebecca hesitated. Are you prepared for public scrutiny of the trust structure? Yes. Rebecca studied her for a moment. You anticipated this. Danielle's answer was quiet. I prepared for it. As the meeting ended, Danielle remained seated. Outside the conference room windows, employees moved through corridors with renewed steadiness. Uncertainty had been replaced by structure. Not comfort, structure. Danielle placed her hand over her abdomen once more. For the first time since the gala, her breathing felt unforced. Not because conflict had vanished, but because it had been addressed. Documentation had replaced denial. Process had replaced assumption. And the slow burn that began in a marble lobby had become institutional correction. No spectacle, no vengeance, just record and consequence. The regulatory inquiry began without ceremony. 2 representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission arrived at headquarters on a gray Thursday morning. They carried slim briefcases, neutral expressions, and a checklist that did not bend for legacy. Olivia Grant met them in the lobby. Conference room D is prepared, she said calmly. Danielle watched from the mezzanine level above as they entered. No one stopped her this time. No one redirected her path. She descended the staircase at her own pace and joined the meeting once introductions were complete. Michael was already seated at the table, posture upright, face composed but pale beneath fluorescent light. Rebecca Lawson arranged documentation into orderly stacks. Daniel Kim connected his laptop to the projector. The lead regulator, Karen Whitfield, began without preamble. We appreciate the voluntary disclosure, she said. Our purpose is verification. Her tone was neither adversarial nor sympathetic, just procedural. Daniel presented the financial mapping first. Funds originating from Langston Foundation Initiative. Transferred through Harrington Event Group. Routed into Langston Strategic Ventures. Karen Whitfield interrupted once. Was there any disclosure of beneficial overlap in board minutes? Rebecca responded evenly. No. Was trustee ratification sought? No. Karen made a note. Victoria joined via secure video conference again. Her image appeared steady, posture impeccable. Miss Langston, Karen said, did you anticipate personal benefit from the secondary investment vehicle? Victoria did not hesitate. I anticipated strategic alignment. That was not my question. A pause. Any benefit to me was incidental. Danielle watched without expression. Karen continued. Did you disclose your association with Langston Strategic Ventures to the board prior to fund routing? Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. No. Why? I deemed it unnecessary at the time. The silence that followed was clinical. Karen Whitfield turned towards Danielle. As trustee, when did you become aware? Danielle answered precisely. Preliminary irregularities identified 5 days post-gala. Litigation hold initiated immediately. Forensic review commenced within 12 hours. Karen nodded once. You acted promptly. Danielle did not respond to the validation. She simply inclined her head. The inquiry extended for hours. Email threads were reviewed. Audio logs replayed. The security recording from the gala was entered into evidence, not because it directly related to financial misconduct, but because it illustrated governance intent. Karen listened to Victoria's voice escort her out. Now, she made another note. When the meeting adjourned, the regulators did not offer conclusions. They stated only, "We will issue preliminary findings within 30 days." As they exited, employees in the hallway pretended not to look. But they felt the gravity. Inside conference room D, silence lingered. Victoria spoke first. You've invited federal oversight into our home? Danielle's voice remained calm. It was already there. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Mom, he said quietly, you should have disclosed. Victoria turned toward him. I built this company before you understood markets. You built it, he replied, but you didn't own it alone. That distinction landed heavier than accusation. Victoria ended the call without another word. Her screen went dark. Danielle gathered her documents methodically. No rush, no triumph. Outside the building, reporters had begun assembling discreetly along the sidewalk. Grant and Holloway had advised limited public statement. At 3:00 p.m., Danielle stood at a podium inside the lobby, the same marble lobby from the gala. Cameras faced her. This time, no one attempted to remove her. She did not embellish. Fisher and Langston Holdings is cooperating fully with regulatory review, she said. We initiated this process to reaffirm our commitment to fiduciary transparency and employee safety. One reporter asked, is this a family conflict? Danielle paused only briefly. This is a governance matter. Another question, will there be criminal charges? That determination rests with regulators. Her answers were steady controlled. When she stepped away from the podium, the chandelier above reflected light across her charcoal suit. The marble floor held no memory of the night she had been dragged across it. But she did. Back upstairs, Michael waited for her outside the elevator. You handled that well, he said. It required clarity, she replied. He hesitated. I don't know how to fix this. Danielle looked at him. Fix what us? She studied his face carefully. Repair was not apology. Repair was transformation. You begin by understanding what you ignored, she said. He nodded slowly. I'm trying. I know. That was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Across the city, Victoria sat alone in her townhouse living room. The television displayed Danielle's brief press statement. Victoria muted the volume but watched the image. Calm, unemotional, precise. She had underestimated that composure. Not weakness, structure. Her phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances offering guarded support. Few offered open defense. Silence was spreading around her, not chosen silence, but distance. Back at headquarters, the afternoon light faded into evening. Rebecca entered Danielle's office with preliminary feedback from Grant and Holloway. Regulators appear receptive to voluntary disclosure, she said. Mitigation likely if no further undisclosed elements surface. Danielle nodded once. Continue cooperation. Rebecca hesitated. There's one more matter. She handed over a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal complaint filed by an employee, anonymous but time-stamped, the night of the gala. The complaint described witnessing the physical removal and feeling intimidated by executive conduct. Danielle read it quietly. She closed her eyes for a moment. Beneficiary welfare had extended beyond her child. It included every employee who had watched authority misuse itself. "Add this to the file," she said. Rebecca nodded. As night settled, Danielle returned home. The penthouse felt different now, less uncertain, more transitional. Michael sat at the dining table, reviewing compliance drafts. He looked up when she entered. "Are you staying?" he asked softly. Danielle removed her coat and placed it carefully over the chair. "I'm staying until stability is restored," she said. And after she placed her hand gently over her abdomen again. "After we reassess," Michael absorbed the answer without protest. Later, alone in her office, Danielle opened her notebook once more. Regulatory inquiry underway. Public statement delivered. Employee complaint logged. She hesitated before writing the final line for the day. Power does not require volume. She closed the notebook. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Inside Fisher and Langston Holdings, the slow burn had reached visibility. Not explosive, not theatrical, but irreversible. And Danielle understood something now with clarity. Justice, when structured properly, does not humiliate. It corrects. 30 days passed without spectacle. No raids, no dramatic headlines, no televised disgrace. Just process. The Securities and Exchange Commission issued its preliminary findings in a sealed communication to Fisher and Langston Holdings before any public summary was released. Rebecca Lawson received the notice at 7:12 a.m. and walked it personally to Danielle's office. Danielle read the letter once, then again. Findings: failure to disclose beneficial financial interest, breach of fiduciary transparency obligations, insufficient internal oversight mechanisms prior to trustee intervention, mitigating factor, voluntary disclosure, and immediate corrective action. No criminal referral at this stage. Civil penalties were outlined. Governance reforms mandated. Danielle closed the folder gently. "It's survivable," Rebecca said quietly. "Yes," Danielle replied, "because we corrected it." Across the hall, Michael read the same summary. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of penalty, but from recognition of proximity. Had Danielle remained silent, the inquiry would not have been voluntary. It would have been discovered, and far less forgiving. At 10:00 a.m., the board reconvened to formalize structural reforms. Danielle chaired the meeting, not ceremonially, but legitimately. Recommendations were adopted: independent compliance committee, reporting directly to trustee authority, transparent vendor disclosure protocols, mandatory conflict of interest declarations for all executives, security policy amendments protecting employee and board member autonomy. Victoria attended remotely again. She listened without interruption. When invited to speak, she did not defend. "I disagree with the interpretation," she said calmly, "but I accept the outcome." It was the closest she had come to concession. After the vote concluded, she remained on screen a moment longer. Then, she addressed Danielle directly. "You could have handled this privately." Danielle met her gaze without hostility. Private correction without disclosure would have perpetuated exposure. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "You value procedure over loyalty." Danielle's reply was measured. "I value protection over preference." Victoria's screen went dark. This time not in anger, in understanding. Later that afternoon, a carefully worded public statement was released, summarizing regulatory findings and governance reforms. Markets reacted mildly, then stabilized. Analysts described the outcome as managed correction. Inside headquarters, employees exhaled quietly. Structure had held, but something else had shifted, more personal, less documented. That evening, Michael asked Danielle to walk with him along the river. It was colder now, winter air sharp and clarifying. They walked slowly. She wore flat boots. He kept his pace aligned with hers. "I spoke to my mother," he said after several minutes. Danielle did not look at him. and she's stepping down from all advisory involvement. Danielle nodded once. That's appropriate. He hesitated. She won't attend the board holiday reception. That's her decision. Silence followed. He stopped walking. Danielle, he said quietly, I don't want to be the man who hesitated in that lobby. She turned toward him. Then don't be. I need to know if there's still a marriage to protect. Her gaze softened, not sentimentally, but thoughtfully. Marriage requires mutual clarity, she said, not deference. He swallowed. I deferred. Yes. He did not argue. The river moved beside them, indifferent. I've started individual counseling, he added. Danielle studied him carefully. That's wise. I'm trying to understand why I equated leadership with inheritance. She nodded slightly. Because it was easier. He accepted the truth. Will you stay? He asked again. Danielle placed her hand gently against her abdomen. The baby shifted steady. I will not raise a child inside illusion, she said quietly. He absorbed the statement. It means stability must be authentic. He nodded. I'm willing. She did not promise in return. Willingness was the beginning, not the outcome. Days later, Danielle finalized a document separate from governance reforms. It was personal, a structured marital separation agreement. Not filed, not yet. Prepared. She placed it inside the same leather folder that once held trust documents. Preparation was not threat. It was insurance. In her office at headquarters, she convened a final internal leadership session before maternity leave planning began. We corrected governance, she said evenly. Now we sustain it. She outlined succession planning for interim operational oversight during her leave. Michael listened not as heir apparent, but as participant. He asked procedural questions. He did not assume. Rebecca observed the exchange quietly. Change, she knew, was rarely loud. It was behavioral. Across the city, Victoria packed framed photographs into storage boxes, awards, gala programs, newspaper clippings. She paused at one image, Michael as a child, standing beside her at a charity luncheon podium. She touched the glass lightly. Legacy, she realized too late, was not ownership. It was stewardship. And stewardship had boundaries she had crossed. Back at the penthouse that evening, Danielle sat alone at her desk. She opened her notebook once more. Regulatory findings issued, civil penalty accepted, reform measures adopted, personal contingency drafted. She hesitated before writing the final line. Stability requires alignment at every level. She closed the notebook and stood slowly. Michael entered the room moments later. I made dinner, he said awkwardly. She glanced toward the kitchen. It was simple, unpolished. Effort, not performance. She sat. They ate quietly. No dramatic declarations, no promises carved in urgency. Just two people sitting across from each other without illusion. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Danielle felt the baby move more strongly than before. Steady, alive, uncomplicated. She rested both hands against her abdomen. You will inherit structure, she whispered, not legacy, not narrative, structure. Outside, Manhattan glittered as always. Inside, Fisher and Langston Holdings' governance had been restored. Inside the penthouse, something else remained unresolved, but honest. Danielle understood one thing clearly now. Correction was complete, but departure was still possible, and dignity required freedom to choose. Spring arrived quietly. Not with spectacle, but with subtle change, the kind Danielle had learned to recognize long before anyone else noticed it. The river thawed first. Then the air softened. Then the light shifted. Inside Fisher and Langston, Holdings reforms moved from mandate to routine. Compliance reviews were no longer extraordinary. Conflict of interest declarations became standard agenda items, rather than uncomfortable interruptions. The civil penalty had been paid. Public scrutiny had faded. Analysts moved on to other stories. Structure had stabilized. But personal equilibrium required a separate decision. Danielle sat alone in her office early one morning a week before her scheduled maternity leave. The leather notebook rested closed in front of her. She did not open it. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to document. Rebecca knocked softly before entering. "Regulators have concluded preliminary oversight," she said. "No further action anticipated if compliance holds." Danielle nodded once. "Thank you." Rebecca hesitated. "You built a framework most companies wait to need," she said quietly. Danielle considered the phrasing. "I didn't build it," she replied. "I enforced it." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Enjoy your leave." When the door closed, Danielle looked around the office slowly. No tension lingered. No hostility hummed beneath conversation. Just order. Michael had changed too, but change was measured in behavior, not apology. He attended compliance briefings without defensiveness. He asked questions he once assumed he knew the answers to. He no longer referred to the company as ours in private shorthand. He referred to it as governed. That shift mattered. But Danielle understood something that had nothing to do with corporate structure. Trust rebuilt slowly. Respect restored through action. But identity, once revealed, does not retreat. That afternoon, she asked Michael to meet her in Conference Room A, the same room where votes had been cast. He arrived promptly. She placed a folder on the table between them. Not the trust documents, not audit reports, the separation agreement. Prepared, structured, calm. He recognized it immediately. "You're leaving," he said, not accusing, not pleading, not in anger, she replied. In clarity. He remained standing for a moment before sitting. "I thought we were rebuilding." "We are," she said gently, "but rebuilding does not erase foundation." He absorbed that slowly. "I deferred," he said. "I was blind. Yes, I'm not anymore. I know." Silence stretched between them, not brittle, not loud, just honest. Danielle folded her hands. "I cannot raise a child in a structure where my stability depends on someone else's awakening." His breath caught slightly. "That's not fair. It's not punishment," she said. "It's prevention." He looked down at the document, but did not touch it. "I love you," he said quietly. She did not flinch. "I believe you," she answered. And that's not enough. Love without structural equality becomes imbalance. The language was precise, not emotional. He nodded slowly. "When did you decide the night of the gala?" she said. "When I realized I was alone in a room I legally governed." The truth settled heavily. "I should have walked toward you," he said. "Yes," he swallowed. "I won't contest this." She inclined her head slightly. "I didn't expect you would." They remained seated for several more minutes, neither rushing to fill the silence. There was no raised voice, no bitterness, no humiliation, just conclusion. Later that week, Danielle signed the formal resignation from daily operational leadership, not from governance, but from visible executive presence. She would remain trustee. Oversight would continue. But visibility would shift. At her final internal address before leave, she stood once more in the marble lobby, the same space where she had been dragged across polished stone. Employees gathered quietly. Michael stood among them, not beside her. Danielle spoke without theatrics. "Institutions survive because structure survives," she said. "Not because individuals remain." She did not mention the gala. She did not reference conflict. She simply outlined continuity plans and reaffirmed compliance commitment. When she finished, applause followed, respectful, not exuberant. She stepped away from the podium and descended the lobby steps at her own pace. No one blocked her path. Outside, spring sunlight warmed the stone. Michael followed at a distance. "Will you let me be present when the baby is born?" he asked quietly once they reached the sidewalk. She considered him carefully. "Yes," she said. "As a father, not as a husband." He nodded. That distinction too mattered. Weeks later, in a quiet hospital room filled with filtered light, Danielle held her daughter for the first time. Small fingers curled instinctively around her thumb. The world outside continued its negotiations and headlines and board meetings. Inside the room, None of it mattered. Michael stood near the window, watching cautiously. He approached slowly. "She's perfect," he whispered. Danielle looked down at the child in her arms. "She's structured," she said softly. He almost smiled at that. Almost. In the months that followed, Danielle moved into a smaller residence, overlooking the river, closer to the park, farther from the penthouse that carried too much echo. The separation remained dignified. No public scandal, no retaliatory statements, no humiliation. Victoria resigned fully from advisory roles and withdrew from public philanthropic leadership. There were no dramatic confrontations, only absence. One evening, Danielle sat by the window of her new home, her daughter asleep in a bassinet nearby. The leather notebook rested on the table beside her. She opened it for the final time. Gala directive recorded. Governance breach corrected. Authority realigned. Marriage concluded without spectacle. She hesitated before writing the final line, left with dignity intact. She closed the notebook gently and placed it in a drawer. Not hidden, archived. Outside, the river moved steadily beneath city lights. Inside, quiet filled the room, not the silence of endurance, the silence of peace. Danielle did not feel victorious. She felt aligned. An alignment, she understood now, was stronger than revenge. There are moments in life when humiliation tempts us to respond loudly, when injustice feels like it demands spectacle. But sometimes, the strongest response is documentation, procedure, calm correction. Danielle did not shout. She did not retaliate. She did not humiliate in return. She observed. She recorded. She enforced structure. And when the time came, she walked away, not because she was defeated, but because she was free. If you've ever stood in a room where you were underestimated, if you've ever chosen patience over impulse, if you believe dignity is more powerful than noise, take a moment to reflect on what quiet strength looks like in your own life. If this story resonated with you, you're welcome to share where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I read every message. And if you value stories about justice, resilience, and integrity, feel free to stay connected. Some stories don't need volume. They just need truth.